These musicians are outcasts, the lepers of the music business. They've been banned by the radio stations, boycotted by record shops, blacklisted by promoters. The last time they played a concert was in July this year, and tonight they're playing in secret in the back room of a pub in Kent in an attempt to clear their name. The landlord thinks he's booked a country and western band. He couldn't be further from the truth.
This burnt-out shell is all that's left of the last place that band, the Four Skins, played in. This is the Hambra Tavern in Southall, a largely Asian immigrant area. And it was here that three so-called Oi bands, including the Four Skins, came on July the 3rd to play a concert. They brought with them hundreds of skinhead fans, many of them known National Front supporters, who'd been brought in by coach from the East End of London some 20 miles away. Before the concert, some of the skinheads assaulted elderly Asians in the street, and they daubed shop windows with National Front slogans. Later that night, the Asians retaliated, and what followed turned into a full-scale race battle.
Asian youth threw petrol bombs and bricks through the windows of the Hambra Tavern. They fought with skinheads outside, and by the end of the evening, 110 people were in hospital, and the police had made dozens of arrests.
From early evening, as soon as we found that our community was being invaded and our women being beaten up by the skinheads, it was a complete shock. And, you know, we were sort of further shocked by the fact that the police, there was no response from the police. That here you had large groups of people, fascist people, who were doing Nazi-type salutes, writing NF on the condensation of the windows, and abusing all the Asians here, that, you know, police still don't do anything.
The Four Skins claim to this day that they're not racist, and that they weren't to blame for the riot.
Package just went a bit mad, didn't they? Just went over the top.
But they were provoked, weren't they?
Who provoked them? We didn't. The Asians come up, they was in force, they used that gig as an excuse to put out their little bit of violence, have their say and to riot. It was just an excuse for them. We was Andy scapegoat, that's all.
But don't you feel, in a way, guilty? Because, I mean, you're the focus of all that, aren't you?
Well, I don't feel guilty about nothing.
The press was merciless in its attack on the Oi bands. They were branded as right-wing extremists, racists, a dangerous influence on the young. Those in the music business who had flirted with them were condemned as being evil or naive.
Naivety is probably the right word when you examine the whole style of the Oi bands. They're pro-violence, anti-black, anti-police. It's no wonder they attract Nazi skinhead followers. These are just a few of the words from the typical Oi songs. Boots are made for booting, guns are made for shooting. If you see the enemy, you're sure to stick the boot in. And again, black youth standing in the lights, crowding together, they're ready to fight. The army's in shooting is the rage. They want to lock them up, put them in their cage. There's blood on the streets.
The music trade quickly decided that Oi music was too closely associated with extremist politics for comfort, and that violence, whether it came from left or right, was bad for business. Suddenly it became embarrassing to be associated with Oi music at all. But for all their public condemnation of the bands, at least one major record company quietly went on making money out of them.
This record caused quite a fuss when it was released earlier this year, not so much for its musical content as for the title, Strength Thru Oi. It's based on a Nazi slogan, Strength Thru Joy. And the man on the front cover turns out to be a neo-Nazi now serving a prison sentence. What's surprising about this record is that it wasn't produced by a small label, but by one of the giants, Decca. They won't make any official comment today, but they do say that the record has been deleted. That is flatly denied by the manager of this shop. He says he can get hold of as many copies as he likes, and that this record makes a lot of money for Decca Records.
It's been argued that if the Southall riot hadn't broken out, Oi music, even with its violent subversive overtones, wouldn't have come under attack. But Peter Bradley of the Institute for Contemporary Studies believes that Oi music was, in his own words, a political tinderbox well before the July riot. Just before the disturbances, his organisation completed a report on the extreme right-wing influence on rock music.
There is a serious problem, and that is basically that the National Front, the British Movement and other smaller groups have made considerable inroads amongst young people of the inner cities in rock concerts. They've stirred up a lot of hatred, they've provoked a lot of violence inside the concerts. And our feeling is that some groups anyway, have not helped matters by really being rather ambiguous in their statements against National Front or supporters of National Front, and sometimes in saying nothing at all, and behaving in a very provocative manner.
The British movement is a Nazi movement! Smash the British movement! The British movement is a Nazi movement! Smash the British movement!
It was to counteract the influence of the right-wing political groups on pop music that the Rock Against Racism campaign was started in the late 1970s. It was an attempt to counter the growing feeling among some pop musicians that fascism could be fun. Ideas which disturbed influential disc jockeys like Radio 1's John Peel.
So there has been, which I think is unfortunate, but it exists, there has been really since the very beginning of punk, in fact perhaps before that, but most notably, noticeably from 1976-77 onwards, a sort of flirtation with Nazi imagery, which people justify as saying that they find fascinating, the Berlin of the 1930s and so on. But I mean, the original punks were always swathed in swastikas and so on. And then there was an LP sleeve by the Skids, who was certainly not an Oi band, which was very kind of Aryan and Nazi wall poster-ish. And the bands like Joy Division, whose very name is derived from, from some SS sub-organisation, and the band which have followed them called New Order, which is again a Nazi-derived name. So there's always been this, which I regard as unpleasant flirtation with it.
Recently, there have been more worrying parallels with the Germany of the 1930s. High unemployment in Britain, especially among the young and the unskilled, has made working-class whites ideal recruiting material for extreme right and left-wing political organisations. The chosen recruiting ground was obvious. Those places where large numbers of young, disaffected whites congregated. Football stadiums and halls where pop music was played.
This is an issue of a magazine produced by the Young National Front and aimed specifically at young white working-class kids. Inside there is a pop column which singles out various bands which the National Front claims are their bands, something denied by many of the bands mentioned. Now, I've been speaking to the editor of this paper, Joe Pierce, who, by the way, refuses to appear in front of our cameras. And he claims that the Oi bands in particular are National Front bands, that they're in a way the musical wing of the National Front. And he claims that if they deny it, then they must face the consequences. Trouble like the trouble which ended the career of a band called Sham 69.
The trouble happened in London, and according to the Rock Against Racism campaign, it set the pattern for much of the subsequent right-wing involvement in rock music.
We're standing outside the Rainbow Theatre where Sham 69 played their farewell gig. On that occasion, something like half the audience were involved in Sieg Heil salutes, and that was organised around perhaps a core of 100 British movement sympathisers. They are organised in a number of different ways. They will try to organise their own entertainment, Rock Against Communism, which hasn't attracted many big-name musicians and is really the reason why they haven't succeeded with that particular campaign. They've also been involved in disrupting or attacking a large number of gigs. Certainly they've done this on a number of occasions with Rock Against Racism gigs. In Notting Hill, for instance, they attacked a gig we had organised with sledgehammers and crowbars, and 8 people were put in hospital. More recently, at the Rock Garden last Thursday, they attacked a punkabilly gig, and again, people were injured in the process. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the way in which the National Front and the British movement attach themselves, particularly to some of the bands who have a skinhead following, Madness, for example.
The National Front claimed that at one recent concert by Madness, they distributed 700 copies of their magazine Bulldog. But eventually, Madness issued a statement condemning racist groups. A brave gesture, since it might bring a violent reaction from those racists among their fans. Disc jockey John Peel says all bands with a right-wing following are caught in the same trap. But how far are musicians responsible for the extreme politics of their fans?
I don't think they're responsible for them at all, actually. I think the right-wing attitude, rather like as it is with football. I mean, you know, the West Ham players are not themselves responsible for the fact that a lot of people turn up at West Ham matches and stand at the back, stand in the terraces doing Sieg Heils, and it's very difficult. What are they going to do? Stop playing football? You know, they've got to go on playing football, and these people will turn up. There's very little they can do about it. I think they could go further in sort of publicly disavowing them, but then at the same time, particularly with a band like the Foreskins, they're really dependent on those people for their audience, and they're living in the East End. They make life very dangerous for themselves if they make too many public statements opposing the right-wing movements and so on.
When the Foreskins made their attempt to rid themselves of their right-wing racist image, they made sure that the fans at their secret concert in Kent were there by invitation only. It was to be a demonstration to the world that in spite of Southall, they were just a band who wanted to play music, a band who wanted nothing to do with politics.
Well, we won't stop playing till they turn us off again.
The concert had been going for only half an hour when things started to go wrong. First, there was a mysterious fault with the power supply. Then the fans took over. Some were wearing T-shirts decorated with the Union Jack, which happens, among other things, to be the adopted emblem of the National Front.
Why do you wear that if you're patriotic? Patriotic? It's English. It's English. You haven't seen no one's Nazi badges. No one's Nazi badges.
Paradoxically, some of the fans who claimed they weren't Nazis did indulge in half-hearted Sieg Heil salutes, possibly as a joke for the benefit of our cameras. If it was a joke, it badly misfired. At other bands' concerts, there's been evidence that neo-Nazis encourage fans to take part in similar, but much more serious flirtations with fascism.
I don't think people actually stop and think enough about what it is that they're doing, and I think they could, well, there are plenty of other images which they could attach themselves to, but of course there is the desire to shock, and this is a very effective way of shocking, because in most people's minds, the sign of a swastika or something like that is still distressing. You know, it distresses me, and so it's the shock value, I think, that's important. People don't actually stop and think about what lies behind that and the very real dangers that exist.
They daubed shop windows with National Front slogans. Later that night, the Asians retaliated, and what followed turned into a full-scale race battle.
Asian youth threw petrol bombs and bricks through the windows of the radio stations, boycotted by record shops, blacklisted by promoters. The last time they played a concert was in July this year, and tonight they're playing in secret in the back room of a pub in Kent in an attempt to clear their name. The landlord thinks he's booked a country and western.
Came on July the 3rd to play a concert. They brought with them hundreds of skinhead fans, many of them known National Front supporters, who've been brought in by coach from the East End of London some 20 miles away. Before the concert, some of the skinheads assaulted elderly Asians in the street, and they...
These musicians are outcasts, the lepers of the music business. They've been banned by Aston Band. He couldn't be further from the truth.
This burnt-out shell is all that's left of the last place that band, the Four Skins, played in. This is the Hambra Tavern in Southall, a largely Asian immigrant area. And it was here that three so-called Oi bands, including the Four Skins,